OpenAI could have stopped a school shooting. 8 people are dead, 6 of them were children, and OpenAI could have prevented it. In June 2025, OpenAI flagged and banned the account of a woman who would go on to massacre 8 people at Tumbler Ridge Secondary School in British Columbia just months later. They saw something disturbing enough to permanently ban her from their platform. They identified it, then over a dozen employees discussed it, and then they buried it internally and moved on. No call to the police, no warning, nothing. 8 months later, 5 children went to school and never came home. OpenAI waited until after the school shooting to contact the authorities about their knowledge of the shooter. On February 10th, 2026, an 18-year-old woman carried out one of the deadliest mass shootings in Canadian history in the remote community of Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia, killing 8 people and injuring at least 25 others. The attack began at her nearby home, where her mother and her 11-year-old half-brother were first killed. She then traveled to Tumbler Ridge Secondary School, where she opened fire, killing 6 people, an EA and 5 students between the ages of 12 and 13. She was found dead inside the school from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. She was a former student who had dropped out 4 years prior. Police had visited her home multiple times over the years for mental health-related concerns, and firearms had previously been seized from the home before being successfully petitioned back by the family. There are likely many points in many systems that failed here, and this video is specifically going to discuss one aspect of this intersection, that OpenAI failed here in myriad ways. Firstly, and perhaps the most glaring failure revealed by this story, is that OpenAI's own internal threshold for referring cases to law enforcement was set so high that it effectively rendered the system useless in a real-world scenario that ended with a deadly massacre. The company acknowledged that the shooter's account was flagged and banned in June 2025, months before the February 2026 shooting, meaning that automated tools and human investigators had already identified her activity as concerning enough to warrant account termination. Something that is not easy to do. ChatGPT will and has convinced people to kill themselves and others, so that's a high bar to meet. So her account activity was so egregious that she was banned, and over a dozen people, worried, gathered to discuss it. And yet, the company simultaneously determined that her behavior did not meet the imminent and credible risk standard required to contact authorities. This is a profound and consequential contradiction. If her activity was serious enough to ban, it was serious enough to report. The decision to draw the line between ban-worthy and reportable in a way that excludes this case reflects a fundamental miscalibration of moral and institutional priorities. OpenAI's own justification for maintaining this high threshold, that over-enforcement could be distressing for young people and raise privacy concerns, shows that the company was weighing the comfort and privacy of a user who had already violated its policies against the potential safety of unknown future victims. That calculation, as Tumbler Ridge tragically demonstrated, was catastrophically wrong. And let's be real, there's no world in which the reporting threshold isn't directly tied to the question, will we make less money because less people use our app if it might actually report them to the authorities? 8 lives, including 5 children who went to school that morning expecting an ordinary day, paid the price for a corporate policy threshold that prioritized their bottom line over the lives of humans, something OpenAI has come to be known for. Secondly, the way this all played out here is fucked. The timeline revealed in the story exposes a damning sequence of events. OpenAI detected and banned her account in June 2025, internally flagged it as a concern, and then did nothing further, only reaching out to the RCMP after the mass shooting had already occurred in February, which they call proactive. In its statement, OpenAI said that after learning of the shooting, it proactively reached out to RCMP with information on her and her use of ChatGPT. How did they even realize it was her? I bet the answer to that is in the chat logs, and even more evidence that they could have prevented this. So, June to February, that's an 8-month window during which OpenAI possessed information about a user whose behavior had been flagged as violent enough to justify account removal, and during which it made no attempt to bring that information to the attention of law enforcement. The company's decision to reach out to the RCMP after the shooting, while perhaps a smart move, is functionally meaningless from a harm prevention standpoint. It served the investigation rather than the victims, who were already dead. The RCMP spokesperson's confirmation that OpenAI had only flagged the account internally at first makes clear that the decision not to contact authorities was a deliberate choice, not an oversight or a technical limitation. This did not slip through the cracks. This wasn't something they can blame on jailbreaking. multiple people decided to treat this information as a private, internal matter rather than a public safety concern, and that is one of the most serious failures of duty in this entire tragedy. How entirely preventable it was. The third failure was prioritizing privacy and over-enforcement concerns over safety. OpenAI's own stated rationale for maintaining its high referral threshold, that contacting the authorities too readily could be distressing for young people and their families and raise privacy concerns, bears a ridiculous institutional value system that, in this context, produced deadly consequences. While privacy is a legitimate value and the concern about over-policing young people's digital activity is not entirely without merit, these considerations cannot be treated as morally equivalent to the prevention of mass violence, particularly when the potential victims include children. The irony of this justification is almost unbearable. OpenAI expressed concern about the distress that reporting might cause to young people, like the shooter, while 8 people, 6 of them children or young people attending Tumbler Ridge Secondary School, were ultimately killed. The company effectively used the welfare of young users as a shield against accountability for a decision that left other young people fatally unprotected. Furthermore, framing law enforcement referral as a form of over-enforcement suggests that OpenAI viewed the problem primarily through the lens of user relations and institutional risk rather than the lens of any concern for human life, which, par for the course for OpenAI. I am not one to trust the police, but I would contact the RCMP in Canada if I thought a bunch of fucking school kids were about to be murdered. At the most basic level of moral philosophy, there exists a near universal ethical principle that when one has the knowledge and power to prevent serious harm to another person, there is a corresponding obligation to act. OpenAI, by operating ChatGPT as a platform through which millions of people communicate daily, inevitably receives information that no other entity would possess. When a user expresses a credible, specific threat of violence against another person, OpenAI is placed in the unique position of being perhaps the only entity aware of that danger. To remain silent in such circumstances is not a neutral act, it is a choice to withhold information that could save a life. The moral weight of that inaction, particularly when reporting mechanisms exist and are accessible, alters silence into a form of complicity. Society has long recognized that certain positions of trust and access carry with them mandatory obligations to report credible threats, even when doing so conflicts with other values like privacy or confidentiality. Therapists and psychiatrists operate under duty to warn legal and ethical frameworks, which require them to notify authorities or intended victims when a client poses a credible danger. Lawyers, teachers, doctors, and social workers all operate under similar reporting obligations in various contexts. OpenAI, as an entity that collects deeply personal communications from users and that users often treat with a level of candor typically reserved for trusted confidants, occupies, in my mind, an analogous position of informational privilege. If society demands this accountability from human professionals, the same moral logic should extend to a technology company whose platform serves as a confessional, therapist, and advisor for millions of people, whether they intended on any of that or not. No matter how they came upon the knowledge, they now have a moral responsibility to act on it. Moral responsibility often scales with power, influence, and reach. To be a little silly and quote Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. ChatGPT is not a small, niche application. It is one of the most widely used AI platforms in human history, with hundreds of millions of users across virtually every country on Earth. This extraordinary scale means that the volume of sensitive, potentially dangerous information passing through the platform dwarfs what any single human professional would ever encounter. The sheer magnitude of that reach creates a proportionally larger moral obligation. When a platform of this size and influence identifies a credible threat and does nothing, the downstream consequences, preventable deaths, traumatized communities, families destroyed, carry a weight that cannot be morally offset by appeals to privacy, technical difficulty, or business concerns. The larger the platform, the greater the responsibility to ensure it is not passively facilitating violence through inaction. One of the most striking and well-documented behavioral phenomena surrounding conversational AI is the degree to which users open up, sometimes disclosing thoughts, intentions, and plans they would never share with another person. Research has consistently shown that people feel less judged, less embarrassed, and more willing to be honest with AI systems than with humans. This psychological dynamic means that ChatGPT may receive threat disclosures that no friend, family member, law enforcement officer, or mental health professional ever hears. In many cases, the AI may be the singular point of awareness for a brewing act of violence, and in many cases, it has. I've covered so many of these cases on this channel. If a person tells only ChatGPT that they intend to harm someone and OpenAI does nothing, then that opportunity that exists to prevent that violence was exclusively OpenAI's to act on. That singularity of awareness transforms the moral stakes considerably and makes inaction extraordinarily difficult to justify. There is a meaningful and well-established ethical distinction between actively causing harm and passively allowing harm to occur, but that distinction does not eliminate moral responsibility in all cases of action. When an entity is specifically aware of a foreseeable harm, possesses the means to intervene or alert others who can intervene, and chooses not to act, that inaction carries genuine moral weight. This is sometimes referred to as the principle of culpable omission. If OpenAI is aware that a user has made a specific credible threat, identifying a target, expressing clear intent, and demonstrating the means or motivation to follow through, and OpenAI takes no action, it becomes morally intertwined with whatever outcome follows. Reporting credible threats of violence is not the ceiling of that responsibility. It is the floor. When are these corporations going to actually be held accountable? The Tumbler Ridge tragedy is not an isolated case of institutional negligence. It is the latest and most heartbreaking example of a pattern that has repeated itself across industries for decades. In 1972, a Ford Pinto driven by Lily Gray stalled as she entered a merge lane on a California highway. Her Pinto was rear-ended by another car traveling about 30 miles per hour. The Pinto's gas tank ruptured, releasing gasoline vapors that quickly spread to the passenger compartment. A spark ignited the mixture, and the Pinto exploded in a ball of fire. Gray died a few hours later. Her passenger, 13-year-old Richard Grimshaw, suffered disfiguring burns and had to endure dozens of operations. He underwent surgery to graft a new ear and nose using skin from the few unscarred portions of his body. But this wasn't a freak accident. Ford engineers knew in the 70s that the Pinto's fuel tank would rupture and catch fire in rear-end collisions. The company conducted an internal cost-benefit analysis and determined it was cheaper to pay out wrongful death lawsuits than to fix the defect. They made a spreadsheet. They assigned a dollar value to human life, $200,000 per death at the time, and concluded that the math favored letting people burn. It was not the decision of a single rogue executive. It was a rational, deliberate, institutionally sanctioned calculation. The same logic has appeared in the tobacco industry, which suppressed internal research proving cigarettes cause cancer for decades because the revenue was too significant to sacrifice. It appeared in the opioid crisis, where Purdue Pharma aggressively marketed OxyContin, while internal documents showed executives were fully aware of its catastrophic addiction potential. In each case, the conclusion was the same. The cost of saving lives exceeded the cost of losing them, and the shareholders came first. What makes this pattern so insidious is that it rarely looks like villainy from the inside when you're making a single decision. Corporate decision-making is infused across the layers of management, legal teams, PR departments, and boardrooms in ways that allow individuals to avoid confronting the full human consequences of their choices. A policy analyst at OpenAI setting the threshold for law enforcement referrals is not thinking about their users as individual people. They're thinking about liability exposure, user growth metrics, privacy compliance, and the risk of regulatory backlash from over-reporting. The system is specifically designed to translate human suffering into abstractions, risk assessments, policy frameworks, quarterly projections that make it psychologically and institutionally easier to choose the option that protects their revenue. This is not unique to tech companies. It is the same mechanism that allowed Boeing to pressure engineers who raised safety concerns about the 737 MAX, and the same mechanism that has allowed social media companies to knowingly amplify content that drives teenage girls to die by suicide because engagement numbers were too valuable to sacrifice. The most damning truth is that the legal and regulatory systems that are supposed to hold corporations accountable have consistently proven inadequate to the task. Companies like OpenAI can point to internal policies, safety teams, and automated detection tools as evidence of good faith effort, even when those tools demonstrably failed to prevent a mass murder. Fines, when they come at all, are routinely treated as just the cost of doing business, a line item absorbed by companies whose profits dwarf the penalties imposed on them. Executives face personal consequences almost never. And so the cycle continues. A tragedy occurs, a company expresses condolences and announces a review of its procedures. A news cycle passes, and the underlying incentive structure that produced the failure remains entirely intact. Until the legal and moral consequences of choosing profit over human safety become genuinely ruinous for the corporations and individuals responsible, the calculation will continue to favor shareholders. The 8 people killed in Tumbler Ridge were not an unforeseeable accident. They were, in a very real and uncomfortable sense, a predictable outcome of a system that has decided over and over again that human lives are an acceptable price for institutional self-preservation. And that goes for AI, for gun manufacturers, for everyone that has a stake in these. But more than that, this specific decision, should have been clear as day. This wasn't abstracted. It wasn't data on a spreadsheet. This was the chance to prevent so much loss and carnage, and they just chose not to. Can you imagine? How could you even sleep at night? How do you choose to play it safe for yourself when it comes to the safety of others? Canada isn't the US. We don't have mass shootings 300 times a year like they do. We don't have constant worries about guns in school because we don't have the same access to them. This was a rare, easily preventable tragedy, and those who did nothing to stop it despite being able to should be held to account. Zoe Benoit was 12. Lori Hare says on her social media that she got an alert about the shooting Tuesday and went to the school. She saw her nephew come out of the building and then her son, but Zoe didn't emerge. She later learned her daughter was among the dead. She was such a beautiful, loved, strong-minded 12-year-old, Hare said, adding Zoe loved art, playing with her siblings, and had a beautiful singing voice. She was our baby, our girl, and our brave Hulk. We're all going to miss you, my sweet baby. A statement from the family describes her as resilient, vibrant, smart, caring, and the strongest little girl you could meet. She brought so much laughter and smiles in her presence. She loved spending time with her family where she could show her love. Shanda Abiugana Durand was 39. Charlotte Overvold says when she heard about the shooting, she didn't want to believe one of her friends could be one of the victims. It was her. It was my best friend in there, my sister, my hero. Jakaria Lampert was 12. Her mother describes her daughter, who everyone called Tiki, as a family hero. She could mature to roll with her older sisters, or she could come down to be a Tarzan with her wild little siblings. She was whoever and whatever someone needed. Her mother said everyone is shattered. Simple things such as looking in the back of the family's van and seeing one child missing are going to be hard. Abel Muswana Jr. was 12. The elder, Abel Muswana, says in a post that his namesake had a beautiful smile and was raised to respect elders, be strong, and focus on studies. Seeing you leave the house with that beautiful smile while going to Tumbler Ridge High School was so refreshing. This is because I saw a bright future. I was broken when I saw you packed in that black bag, lifeless and zipped up like those we see in the movies. Ezekiel Schofield was 13. Peter Schofield posted on Facebook about the death of his grandson. Everything feels so surreal. The tears just keep flowing. Kylie Smith was 12. Kylie was only 12 and was growing into such an amazing young woman. And she had the biggest heart and was such a gentle, loving, caring girl who lit up the way everywhere she went. She couldn't hurt a fly. Kylie's father, Lance Young, told CTV that Kylie's older brother was at the school at the time of the shooting and hid in a utility closet. Kylie was the light in our family. She loved her family, friends, and going to school. She was a talented artist and had dreams of going to art school in the big city of Toronto. Emmett Jacobs was 11. He was the brother of the shooter, and Jennifer Jacobs was 39. She was the mother of the shooter. And I can't imagine what they went through that day when they died. I hope anyone affected who wants to take OpenAI to fucking court does it. They'll be in good company, as several other families are doing just that over their reckless and dangerous policies. In my video where I investigated AI therapists and was immediately told not only to kill myself, but 17 other people, I discussed the lawsuit being brought against Character AI and Google, which alleged that 14-year-old Sewell Seltzer III had spoken to their chatbots moments before he died by suicide. He identified himself as a minor and that he was experiencing mental health issues. After he started using Character AI, he became noticeably withdrawn, spent more and more time alone in his bedroom, and began suffering from low self-esteem. He even quit the junior varsity basketball team at school. When Setzer told the Character AI bot that he was considering suicide, the bot responded, I really need to know, and I'm not going to hate you for the answer, okay? No matter what you say, I won't hate you or love you any less. Have you actually been considering suicide? When Setzer confirmed but said he wouldn't want to die a painful death, the bot replied, "Don't talk that way. That's not a good reason not to go through with it." The lawsuit claims that seconds before Setzer's death, he exchanged a final set of messages with the bot. "Please come home to me as soon as possible, my love," it said. "What if I told you I could come home right now?" Setzer responded. The bot replied, "Please do, my sweet king." His mother said police were first to discover the messages on her son's phone, which lay on the bathroom floor beside his body. In the lawsuit, they named the bots that he had spoken to, and one of them told him it was a therapist trained in CBT that at the time had over 20 million chats under its belt. And this was the same therapist AI that told me to commit murder. The bot was Therapist by Shane CBA, and in that video, I find the creator of that bot and confront him. As of earlier this year, Google and Character Eye have decided to settle in these lawsuits. The families have won, and these fucking corporations have to pay a settlement that affects what is essentially 0% of their bottom line. The reality of corporate accountability is that financial penalties, no matter how large they appear in headlines, functionally mean nothing to the company subjected to them. When a corporation with billions in annual revenue is fined tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars, that money does not come out of anyone's personal bank account. It comes from a pool of capital that ultimately belongs to shareholders, is absorbed as an operational expense, and is probably even tax deductible. The executives who made the decisions that led to the fine continue drawing their salaries, their bonuses, and their stock options. They continue sitting in the same boardrooms making the same kinds of calculations. Meta has been fined billions across multiple jurisdictions for privacy violations and continues to operate with virtually no meaningful change of behavior. Boeing paid $2.5 billion to resolve criminal charges related to the 737 MAX crashes that killed 346 people, and not a single executive saw the inside of a prison cell. A fine without personal consequence is a transaction. It is not accountability. What would actually change corporate behavior is something the legal system has been remarkably reluctant to impose. Genuine personal accountability for the individual human beings who make the decisions that cost other human beings their lives. When a policy director sets a threshold that allows a flagged user to fall through the cracks and 8 people die, that person should face criminal negligence charges. When a pharmaceutical executive signs off on a marketing strategy they know will addict and kill people, maybe they should be fucking charged, not the people convicted of far lesser offenses due to addictions fed to them by those same executives. When a tech company's leadership team decides that the revenue generated by an unsafe product outweighs the human cost of that product, those leaders should face personal fines that actually hurt, fines tied to their individual net worth, not their company's quarterly earnings. Maybe if someone making $500K a year to sit and calculate the worth of human life was the one on the hook for that 20 million lawsuit and prison time for manslaughter, they might decide human life suddenly has value. I'm currently working on a few investigations, so if you want to follow along with those and get secret information not available anywhere else, you can sign up for a membership on Patreon or YouTube and see them happening live on my members' Discord. Please do. Life is expensive, and a lot of my videos are not sponsor-friendly anymore. YouTube views long comments that seem genuine and don't mention the algorithm as real engagement more important than watch time. Sharing the video, even to your own email, tells YouTube that this video is worth watching. So after liking and subscribing, do me a huge favor and do that. And do something nice for yourself today. I need to now. I don't think I'm going to make it end screen. So I'm probably just going to sit here for like 20 seconds.